Today, I'm honored to be joined by Jake Pinnick, a dedicated practitioner and teacher whose journey through Chinese martial arts and Daoist cultivation reflects knowledge, discipline, and much depth. Jake's work with the Wudang arts is not just about movement, but about embodying the philosophy of harmony, resilience, and inner transformations. His commitment to lineage, practice, and sharing wisdom across cultures makes this conversation especially meaningful as it carries universal application to anyone seeking harmony, resilience, and inner transformations, regardless of any background or tradition. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. Thank you for the introduction. That was very nice.
Yes, sir. Well earned and deserved.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jake, your story to me, is both remarkable and deeply inspiring. To begin, let's go back to what led a very young man from Illinois to make the journey to the Wudang Mountains.
So, yeah, I first came here 2010 at 20 years old. June 1st, 5 a.m. in the morning is when I arrived in Wudang. But coming here was quite the journey. I chose to come to Wudang because I didn't really know what I was going to do with my life coming out of high school, starting college. But in pondering that question, I knew that health was really important to me with whatever I chose to do. And for some reason, martial arts came to mind in that, discipline, commitment, longevity, health, this kind of understanding the body to a deeper level. And so that kind of led me to come here. That was one of the main reasons. It's kind of interesting for me, thinking back at 19 years old, 18 years old, when I was finding martial arts online for the first time because I never practiced before. From a small town in Illinois, not a lot of opportunity besides your typical after-school program for karate, taekwondo, which I never really participated in. But then when I got older, I saw the kind of value in that kind of physical well-being or training, and it was also kind of this fantastic thing as well, Chinese martial arts. Wouldn't that be crazy? Kind of a daydream or a big wish, But I found a real opportunity to join a program, and I figured if I wanted to learn, I should go to China, because where better to find the roots, where better to find the source of the training. For me, growing up, I wasn't really challenged particularly by the education system. It wasn't something that really stimulated me, even though I could do well in school. I really thrived in a more immersive environment. And I know for me, I can learn things, I can repeat things, I can do things well, but it's better for my retention, it's better for my longevity of whatever that skill is to actively be doing it, an apprenticeship type example. So I would learn more with my grandfather during the summer doing carpentry and electrician work and plumbing. I would learn more during those few months than I would learn all year at school because I was actively doing it. And so that idea kind of led me to think if I want to learn something like sport or athletic or something with my body to be healthy, I really need to just focus on that. I can't have a once a week private training session. I won't really excel in that. I'll very easily get disinterested and quit. And so I was like, well, if I go to China, I have no opportunity to quit. I have to push myself. And so it was a big answer to a lot of questions I think I had that kind of led me here in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Maybe taking us to the side for a moment.
Yeah.
From your early age to the present, how much is curiosity a part of your getting the most out of life for you enjoying every day?
That is a very direct and good question, actually. I think that for me, my whole goal is whatever I do is to always be a student of life, to always learn something. My thing is that if I'm not experiencing something new or studying something or being introspective or reflective about something, then I kind of feel stagnant. So like curiosity is definitely a big part of my life. Like from when I was a little kid, asking crazy questions, to daydreaming as a teenager, to like coming here and still investigating like classical Chinese philosophy and martial arts and these kind of like translations and things. The curiosity is definitely a big aspect that fuels my like interest for things. And when there's like layers to practices, when there's layers to understanding, I'm more interested, I'm more motivated to be involved. So yeah, I mean that's a really good question, really good observant question, because without curiosity, I don't think that we would really make much like difference or advancement in art and science and all those things. We have to have that sense of curiosity. And I think there's an added element of it for me, which is like I want curiosity and I want the questions to be challenging. Like I want there to be some friction, because I feel like when you're discovering something, or when you're curious about something, like the answers that come easy are like they're not as rewarding, in a sense. Like you want your curiosity to be rewarded with like time and effort and that kind of like skill over time, and that for me seems like much more of a better reward. And it becomes that in essence, it doesn't really become that the destination is important. It's part of that process. Like the process of discovery is maybe more interesting to me than the actual discovery. So yeah, curiosity. Yeah, that's definitely maybe a prime motivator for sure.
Okay, thank you. And I hope you remember later to come back to your approach about the journey being so vital, versus some sort of finish line or metrics or whatever. I did leave out in your introduction, because I know you appear to be very humble, but please let everyone know what your current role is and what all this curiosity and resilience, because I know it wasn't easy getting to where you are this very second, but please tell everyone kind of what your role is today.
Okay, yeah, I am a 16th generation inheritor of the Sanfeng lineage here in Wudang. It's one of the major lineages, not the only one. There's other aspects, but the lineage patriarch is named for Zhan Sanfeng, who's like the legendary creator of Taiji. So our system is kind of focused around Taiji and martial arts, specifically for health applications, for longevity, for flexibility, conditioning, strength. And so part of what I do now is I'm an inheritor, I'm a disciple of that lineage, and my responsibility is to pass those teachings on to the next generation. And I've really embraced that responsibility because I feel like I have a very lucky experience. I came at the right time. I was able to persevere for 15 years now, and I feel like there's a lot of people who could benefit from these practices, whether it's Taiji, martial arts, Taoism, like the thought, the philosophy behind it all, or even the music and the art, the culture that comes from here. So part of what I do is sharing that and transmitting that to students and people around the world. So I have social media, I teach online, I teach in person. The goal is to have my own culture center where I can host students to come and stay and do like immersive programs, without a language barrier, hopefully. And so, yeah, that's kind of the whole thing. Like I'm a 16th generation inheritor, and my goal is to continue transmitting these arts to people around the world, and hopefully to the next generation of teachers.
Well, I wish you great success, because I think it will benefit many people. So, young man from Illinois, to get where you are this very second, I'm sure you learned the very easy to learn language Mandarin, and there was no travails in getting from being a curious young man from Chicago or from Illinois to being in your current role. We talk about resilience here at Your Transformations, and on one of your platforms, you discussed briefly what it took you to get here. So could you kind of explain some of the challenges and uh, humbling experiences and what it took to get through them?
You mean like just for martial arts in general, or for the time?
I think, yeah, Jake, I think from both respects, actually.
Yeah, there's a really important phrase in Taoism that we throw around a lot, especially Shifu taught us. Is one of the first things in Chinese I really remember him saying to us, was the idea of being able to eat bitter, or to 吃苦. And it was this idea that on a very basic level understanding in Chinese philosophy is that, like good medicine tastes bitter. It's like the idea of like the contrast of this effort or this struggle is because this thing is challenging you, it's rewarding you, it's benefiting you, it's healing you in essence. And that idea, like the ability to eat bitter medicine and push through it, knowing that things are going to get better, is definitely a skill that you have to cultivate. And I mean, it's in everything we do. Like just in one training session, just to survive one training session some days, like we never really had an excuse for not training. So you sign up for a long-term program like I did in a traditional methodology of teaching. Basically you sign up and you're signing over your control to your teacher, to your shifu. And so if shifu says today we're doing this, then you just fall in line. That's what you do. And so there's no room for excuse. There's no room for, having some reason to rest or to not participate. And so you have to push yourself just on that respect. Like you may not feel like today Sifu says, today we're gonna box and you're gonna put on gloves and you're gonna fight that guy. And there's no timer. There's rules, but there's not like a clear goal. It's just hit each other until Sifu says stop. And so you really have to let go of your control. You have to be able to just focus on surviving, getting through the training. Sometimes that's each moment, sometimes that's the day, sometimes that's the year. And I think that skill is very, very important to be able to, let go of this expectation and just focus on doing the best you can in the moment. And that has been like maybe one of the biggest things I've learned. Like you can say, okay, we've learned this form, we've learned this style of training, we learned how to do this kick, but those kind of skills, those kind of like character skills, are much more applicable in a much wider way. But they're very hard lessons to learn. It's not something you really succeed at and then you just have it for the rest of life. It's something you always have to work on. And so I feel like, like the same thing I used to say, like temptation is something that doesn't really go away. It's something that you have to, always kind of be resilient against. And that's the same for like the ability to persevere in classroom and in training, in studying and learning a new language or a skill. Like you have to be willing to put in the effort. But I would say a turning point for me in that idea is that at some point you kind of learn how to let go. And I think that's in understanding. And what I mean by this is when you realize that the thing that you want requires you to go through this specific training or this specific methodology, then the training of that methodology doesn't become a choice anymore. It becomes a prerequisite. It's like the classic phrase, if you want to learn to swim, you got to get wet. You can't avoid that part of the experience. And so I think like when I put the responsibility on myself to be like, I want to be in charge of my health, I want to be better, I want to teach other people even. Now I put a hat on that requires me to push through these challenges. And so then it becomes less of a, barrier and more of just a challenge, more of just something you have to go through. And so that resilience, I think, yeah, that's important, but I think it's also like a framework change. Like you have to look at it differently. It's not just like running your head against a wall. it's trying to actually like overcome that, to climb over it, to pass by it in some way, because it's only a moment, it's only a day, it's only one training session sometimes. But I would say, yeah, that ability is definitely hard. Like that's the thing that actually, it's not that people get to a certain point in the training and they're like, I can't learn this skill, and then they stop training. It's that 5 years goes by and you burn out, or 10 years goes by and you burn out. And so it is definitely like this consistency, which is very important.
Um, I, in a manner, you've already answered this, but how would you say discipline, or let me reframe it, how would you say structure creates freedom?
There's a really great story that I like to share with students sometimes, where it's like, you have this classical text in Chinese history where everything is written out. It's the classic of rites, and every detail is written down, like, what you eat in the morning, how many scoops of rice, how long you eat for, when you go to the bathroom, how many pieces of paper you use in the bathroom, and like everything is written down to such meticulous detail that, when outsiders look at this and they say, wow, you live a really strict life and you have all these rules and regulations, and they ask the student about this, and he says, no, he says, I'm free, I don't have to make any decisions. I said, if I have a question, I look at the book tells me what to do, I do that, and I carry on. And so after a time goes by, I just memorize the book, and I don't have to have these like struggles with choices and decisions. And that's an interesting like philosophical perspective, but I kind of feel there's some truth to that. Like, for me, structure and routine, like the acceptance of structure and routine, I should say, is liberating, because like I said, I came here and I gave my responsibility to my teacher, and my teacher has this responsibility now to like help me improve myself. But that kind of, I get to share that responsibility with someone, so it takes the burden off in some ways, right? And that structure gives you a baseline, it gives you a framework to work with. Even now, like I have a very, I wouldn't say like regimented, but I still keep a pretty disciplined daily schedule. I still write out like a to-do list of things that I need to accomplish every day, and I pretty much finish them every time, unless they're like long-term goals that I'm just picking away at. I have like the same kind of training structure, eat the same kind of foods most of the time. I think that letting go of certain things and keeping like a clean schedule is much easier. Like even when it comes to clothing, like I have like pretty much 10 of the same outfit, and I just wear that, and that frees up my decision making for other things that I'm actually, not necessarily challenged to do, but that I'm working with, like something that I want to do. I think you only have so much decision power every day, and if you wake up and you have to make a decision about every little tiny choice, that actually uses a lot of your mental capacity in a way. And I feel like when you have a structure, when you say like, okay, I'm going to get up and do this training, and it's going to be the same training every day, but if you get up and do it every day, it's like it creates just a baseline that you can accept, and that you always have like a foundation to work with. Like even the military follows protocol like that, where it's like you wake up and the first thing you do is make your bed. And it's like you do that, so when you wake up, you make your bed, the first thing you do in the morning is a rewarding experience. It's something that you do for yourself. It's not going to help anybody else. You make your bed. When you come back to sleep at night, your bed's ready. And it's just that little bit of free time, but also a like the first thing you do in the morning is you accomplish something, even if it's just as simple as that. But that sets you up in like a mode of thinking for the rest of the day. And so I think that structure is kind of like that. It gives you this kind of short-term goal almost, and if you accomplish that, then everything else kind of falls into place. And so yeah, I think especially for my like personality type, structure and logic and like organization, this is like what really like adds balance to my life. So I also kind of gravitate towards that. But I think that's a good premise for like good kind of concept for everyone to keep in mind, is like to have some kind of you know, non-decision making structure where it's like, I agree I'm going to do this. If your schedule changes, you change your schedule to adapt to that change, but you don't give up your schedule. I think that that's like a really cool, you know, basic concept that we can do, you know, as long as we do it with intention.
Yeah. Can you expound on that?
Like the idea of keeping it with intention.
Yes, please.
So another phrase I use quite a lot in class, especially with my online students, people who are like learning and they have to keep their own schedule. So this is much harder when you don't have someone following you around with a stick, waking you up every morning. I tell people you have to practice on purpose. You know, this is a big thing everywhere. Like we tend to like wake up sometimes and, oh, it's a nice day, and I go practice and I go do my meditation or my Taiji or my Qigong. I wake up, have a good breakfast. But it's not something that you're doing every day. It's like something that happened on accident. Like you woke up and you felt good today, but tomorrow you don't feel so good, so you don't do it. And I feel like you need to practice with purpose, with intention. Like you need to set out to do it and then do it. Because that kind of like, I practiced a few times this week, that's fine, but did you plan to practice those days, or did it just happen? Did you just fall into it? You know, and for me, like, you know, over time, especially when you practice on purpose with intention, like with a schedule even, then you're promising something to yourself, and even if you don't feel 100% on that day, that is sometimes the day that you get more benefit from your training. You know, it's like a lot of people want to come to Wudang, for example, and live in the mountain and meditate by a river in a misty, clouded environment. It's like, that's great, and you can definitely have a great experience, and I welcome people to come do that, but can you maintain that feeling in a city, in your day-to-day life? You know, if you can't, then that doesn't really have much value, you know, because if we put ourselves in our best possible optimum situation, of course it's going to be easy. But that's not how we live our life. We can't just escape from everything. You know, so I think practice with purpose, with intention, you know, make sure you're doing it because you chose to do it, not that you just kind of like happened upon it, you know. I think that's really, really important. It's a key thing in our practice as well, where like, you know, if you're memorizing the movements and you've got the right steps and in your head you're kind of counting them off and you're going through it, you've got the shape, but there's still that intention, there's still that the kind of mental concentration in a way of what you're doing. Like, do you have intention with what you're doing, or is it just shapes, you know? And we can say that same thing when we apply it to like everyday life for people. Are you going through the motions? Like, we know that phrase in the West. If you're going through the motions, you're just kind of like clocking in, clocking out, going home, doing the things, following the rituals and the traditions, but you don't have any feeling invested into it. And so we can't just stop at emulation, at copying. You know, we can't just stop there and be like, okay, my checklist is to get up and do this every day, and you do that. You also have to have some kind of focal intention inside the form. Because if you're just sitting there and being quiet, that's good for the shape, but are you allowing your mind to just wander away freely all the time? And then, you know, how much of your time is really focused on the training, you know? So yeah, I think intention on purpose is maybe a clear way to look at it. It's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. I struggle with it. You know, I have a mind that kind of races away quite a bit and enjoys that race. So it's like, you know, taming that, quieting that down, letting go of things, allowing yourselves to just have a moment of concentration is very important.
Okay, thank you. You said something in that answer. I think people seem to think it's with the Dharmic traditions of going into a cave and coming out, and now you're in the real world of a metro area, and that feeling gets lost. But I think it's also true, like, you know, Christians go on retreats, so It's not just specific to the Dharmic traditions, but how do you teach? How do you teach your students to take what they learn with you out into the real world and apply it?
Very long and coordinated practice. No, I like to give people concepts to think about, because I think what you're touching on is this really important premise of, like, one, how do we teach people? That's part of that question. Like, I think each individual person is a different kind of sort of puzzle to figure out the right methodology that they react to. And so I think we have a lot of variety in just like how you teach people. I don't know if I can say like this is the method, step 1, step 2, step 3, enlightenment. I don't think that there's like a core practice that necessarily works for everybody. But what I will say is, if I take those concepts of like, okay, I want people to accomplish these things, to learn these characteristics or these larger concepts, I think what I have to do is I have to break it back down into standards of practice. The way I would kind of look at it is, we want to influence someone's thoughts, but we can only do that through words, and we can only strengthen those through habits. It's like the reverse analogy, where it's like, you have to watch your thoughts, because they become your actions eventually. And so we start the other way around. We focus on the actions, so we can eventually influence the mind and the spirit. We can't really start there. Like, if I come day 1 and I say empty your mind, that sounds very good on a cinematic screen, but I would be better off just not saying anything, because if I say empty your mind, you immediately start feeling it. And so it'd be better if I just didn't tell you about that at all. So what I do in my students, in my practice, is definitely a bigger focus on the physical aspects, because that is the thing that we can agree on. Like, if you step and you stretch and you punch and you kick this way, we're all going to generally have the same tactile feedback from that. We're going to have the same response from that training. And so that is our foundation. A lot of Taoism, it's like this, the Ming and Xing, your inherent and your like postnatal experience or self or essence. And so there's this idea of like, okay, we can do so much with your direction in life, but we have to take into consideration your innate self. We have to deal with that first. So I think you have to deal with the body, you have to deal with the physical aspects of it. That gives you your foundation. So I would want people, if let's go back to the meditation example I used in the last answer, the last question. And that's, you can go to the river and you can meditate and you can feel peaceful, but it's very hard to bring that back to Metropolis, downtown Chicago. But what if I tell you, when you have those thoughts and those, you can't sit and you can't focus because your mind is racing around and you're too busy. As soon as you sit down, you just get busy in your head. What if I say, well, don't meditate then? Get up, go train, run a mile, sweep the floor, do action and get into a rhythm in that action. Learn, do the stances, do the kicks, do the forms, do the sword, do the Taiji practice. And then when you finish that, then go back and sit down and see the difference. Because a lot of times we do this like, we have our life right up to practice time, and then we just sit down and we expect there to be a distinction between our life problems and our like self-improvement time, right? But it's not that easy. You have to get the body into a rhythm. You have to let your thoughts kind of dissipate a little bit. And I've heard Sifu give this advice to so many people when they say, I can't stop my mind from thinking. What should I do? How do I stop my mind? How do I control my mind? Like, those words are already so negative and so hard to forget and let go of that. And Sifu will say, if you can't meditate, don't. You're not ready to meditate. Get up, run, get up, move, get up, train, And then when you're tired, sit back down. And that just that distinction will be your foundation, because when you're tired, you don't have time to think. So it's like, it's definitely like a way that we can guide people into those practices. And I think that that's more of what I would like to see myself as. Like I want to teach people, sure, because maybe the information is new, but in reality I want to guide people so they can teach themselves, so they can understand themselves. So this is like a pretty big Taoist principle, this aspect of guiding or showing the way. It's like I can't really put it in a model that you can just copy it and you will get it. But if I give you these tools of like looking at things differently, then you'll get there on your own. And so, yeah, I think this is definitely the way, one of the ways.
Thank you. And this is all incredibly interesting, and so many topics come to mind as you speak. With your meditation practice yourself and what you teach, what role can that play in helping people control their inner dialogue? That can be, the inner dialogue can be so self-defeating at times. And also maybe with that too, Jake, if you don't mind, what role does it also play in controlling your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. So again, right from the beginning, I have to say, like, first we have to kind of dissolve the words like control or tame or manage or block or anything like that, because those analogies are always kind of misplaced when we talk about this. When we talk about this, we use lots of kind of typical analogies and metaphor. You talk a lot about the racing mind or the monkey mind. In Chinese they literally refer to the horse and the monkey. These two aspects of always charging forward and always kind of being uncontrollable. The aspects of the mind itself. I think that there's a couple definitions that we have to redefine or re-implement, and one of those is not trying to control or stop or block thoughts or to empty the mind. I think a lot of these things are negative, because it implies that there's something already amiss with the practice. I revert to analogies, and maybe the first one I would say is this idea of trying to capture the thoughts or to control them. It has this kind of like physical feeling of grasping, right? And a lot of times what I tell people is I say to observe. The most traditional aspect of Taoism, like if you look at the temples in Taoism, they're called guan, like guan cha de guan, which means to observe or to look. This is a personal, how would I say this? This is a personal goal of mine, is to redefine some of these or restructure a lot of these definitions. And I really like the idea of having different names for the temples in China, where you have a gong, which is a palace, which refers to the imperial family. You have a miao, which is like a Buddhist temple, which is a monastery. And you have the Daoist guan, which is this looking, which I think would be better translated as observatory. Because the Taoists are always involved with observing nature. And that's kind of a passive term, right? You're observing. You're not taking action upon that. You're observing and reflecting, and maybe you're taking action afterwards, but that's because you understand things in their context better. So for me, we take that same analogy, we apply it to meditation or to the monkey mind, and I think it becomes we should observe. Doesn't mean ignore, it doesn't mean block it off, it doesn't mean stop it, doesn't mean cut off the thoughts. That's not really a real thing. But we can observe it, and by observing it, we can learn to let it go as well. So it becomes kind of like sitting on the beach, The tide comes in, and the tide goes out. Whatever was there gets washed away, and there's no reason for you to try to grasp onto it. You're not going to catch the water. You're not going to stop it from influencing the beach and influencing your mind. But if you just allow it to come and go, that becomes a passive experience, and you may you may even think about things, but you'll find that you also let them go, and when you're done, you also forget them. Like a dream that passed by, or like a long drive down the road, and you drove for 8 hours, but then when you get there, you actually realize you don't remember the trip. You know you did all the right things, you turned in the right places, but you can't recall specific instances of like the road or like the where you were looking while you were driving. That becomes kind of a passive experience. And so this is my first analogy, is like learning to observe and let go. Let things come, let things go. The second one I would like to say about this is I would like to lean on another of my Shifu's analogies that I really like. And this is the idea of the monkey mind. This is that premise that we're well familiar with in the West of like, stopping the monkey. And one of the most direct and simple and usually like fundamental practices that we do to slow down the mind is we focus on breath. And we give it like you give your mind a centerpiece to kind of hold on to. Now, I always imagine I still use this as a practice for introductory students, and I think even for myself long term. But there's kind of a hidden trap in this idea, because I would say it's not the only way. It's kind of one little aspect to it that can go wrong, and that is that by focusing on the breath, you're essentially just giving a banana to the monkey, which is all well and good. But the thing is, the monkey's very smart. When you learn how to do that for a little while, you end up being able to, like count your breath, but then also kind of think and ponder and disappear. Because now the monkey can eat the bananas and also walk around. The monkey gets stronger, essentially. You're just making him better. And the other thing is then when you lose the count, the monkey goes right back to thinking because there's no banana. But the idea would be not to stop the monkey or discipline the monkey or punish it or give it more bananas to focus on. You just give more tools. The idea would actually be to improve upon your own health, to improve upon your own body, because then you would grow the tree, essentially, that produces bananas. And then the monkey would just sleep under the tree and rest and eat when he wanted to and sleep when he didn't. And by natural course of events, you would tame the monkey because you're providing the monkey with everything it wants to be happy. You're not tricking it. You're not giving it a banana one at a time to kind of keep it in check. You're giving it an environment that it can be happy and content inside. And so I think that's what we're doing with the practice. We're cultivating the body to have a stable, like healthy, vibrant self. And in that way, you're not distracted by these thoughts because there's no discomfort. There's no distraction, so to say. So I think we have to, we have to grow the roots and restore them and let them flourish.
So when people, whether setting or throughout the regular daily life, are observant and become more aware with compassion and without judgment, what would the application be for that when they might just automatically do one of those behaviors out of habit, that whether it's a cigarette or overeating or whatever? What would be the application of becoming more aware and observant with compassion of your thoughts and your behaviors? What would be the application on those non-beneficial habits being changed to more beneficial habits?
Well, I mean, the benefit, the value of that is really limitless. Is really like there's endless examples we could use for that. The idea would be to create space. I think to in so whatever like practice that we accomplish or like skill or character that we can build, like compassion, empathy, to deal with our own like personal habits or even things that are outside you that are distracting you, pulling you away from your practice in some way. I think that the number one thing is we create space. You know, you almost said it in the question too, where it's like you become more reactive as opposed to being aware. I think those are kind of opposites in a way, in that if you're always like surface level emotion, as soon as something happens to you, you react to that. And that could be external, that could be, you know, someone making you angry, that could be someone hitting into your car when you're driving, that could be a million different things. But it could also be internal, like you touched upon. It could be like that thought that comes into your mind that there's some kind of habit or addiction even that you have. And as soon as that thought comes in, the response kicks in. As soon as the thought comes in, the response kicks in. And so you're living kind of a reactive emotional life. And I don't know if I would personally subscribe to like any one emotion as being like the premise of what we focus on, like compassion or awareness or empathy or this kind of like love for the other or something like this. I think it's more general than that, in the sense that we're trying to create space between, you know, input and output. We're trying to create space between our influencing, you know, catalyst and our reaction to that. You know, so we learn this in Taiji. You know, we learn this with someone pushing you, and you learn to relax and kind of maybe guide that in a different direction, as opposed to just pushing against it. You know, we talk about it in philosophy with the Tao Te Ching, like things that are supple and soft and yielding tend to live long, and the things that are rigid and brittle tend to break and die quickly. So it's this idea of being soft, of being pliable, of being non-responsive. Well, not non-responsive, I should say non-reactive to this stimulus is really important. To be able to allow there to be space. You know, you've probably heard this is a pretty common, I think it's also like a typical Dharma quote about the empty boat. And like this analogy of, if you were coasting through the river and you collided with another boat, you'd immediately get angry. But then when you got up to see who you're angry with and you realized the other boat was empty and it just kind of floated down the river and bumped into you, you would immediately feel maybe even shame for being angry at nothing. You know, but your anger would also just dissipate, because you'd be like, oh, it's just an empty boat. So there was no intention directed at you. So there shouldn't be any reaction for you to be angry. But if we could just have a few moments of space before we decided to have an emotional reaction, then we would never get that increased heart rate and anxiety about the anger that's coming. You know, you would be able to have a moment to be like, what was that? Let's go check. Oh, it's nothing. And you would never have that kind of roller coaster of emotions. You know, so I think that story is really cool. But if you would take it back a step and you would say, you know, instead of just realizing that, oh, this was without intention, so I have nowhere to put my anger, so I shouldn't be angry. Instead of doing that, we should go back a step earlier and deal with the root of that anger. You know, and how, like, when the anger comes up or when the happiness comes up, emotions arise naturally as they do. But that's an internal stimulus. We should be able to, you know, observe that passively before we choose to react. And a lot of times you'll find that with these practices, just with that alone, that little moment of time, the whole reason for whatever emotion was going to happen may just dissipate. You know, one of my students online, he uses this in work, and he has a practice that he did for a long time before, where maybe he's working with a colleague and he disagrees with something they did. So he'll write up an email, and then as soon as he finishes the email, he'll delete it and then write a new email. Because typically the first email is a little bit abrasive, it's a little bit angry, it's a little bit, you know, the wording is a little bit too tense, a little bit too strong, because he's upset. But then he writes it, and then he deletes it, and then he writes a new one, and he realizes he's not actually that mad. He's not actually that upset. There's solutions to these problems. I think that's a good like practical application that someone's actually been using that I know. But I think we could go back even before that and just learn how to create space, because in that space we have a buffer to where we can respond to things without just reacting to them so quickly. And I think that alone would give us a lot more compassion and awareness and just empathy for other people.
I call it our hidden superpower, that ability to embrace and enjoy that space between stimulus and response.
Oh,
Could you
that's nice.
could you speak a little bit about how meditation and all your other practices helps someone get that at the visceral level, and not just cognitively say, well, that of course we have that power.
That's a very good point. Yeah, how do you actually train it? Why do these practices develop that skill better than anything else? Because of course we can all do that. That's a really good pointed question. I think the answer to that is that with these practices, Qigong, meditation, Taiji, even martial arts, the difference is that we see in Taoism a more direct connection between, for example, the mental and the physical, the emotional and the body. And these are things that, like, if you have stress in life, you're going to carry that stress in your body. But if you massage that stress out of the body, you also end up dissolving stress in your mind as well. And so the practices are obviously interconnected with our mental and emotional and even spiritual self. But it's very hard to tell you to stop thinking. So we start the other way. We start at the root. We start at the body, because that's the part that we can guide and influence. And so these practices, in their distilled form, the application is that they are used to emulate a certain, whether it be responsive system or a certain embodiment of action or non-action. You're basically emulating these ways of thinking, and then over time that emulation becomes internalized, and you naturally kind of maybe express that. If you're always focusing on these soft kind of elastic movements, your mind also starts to become slow and soft and elastic. And that's just kind of like the embodiment aspect of what we're training. And so I think that's maybe the value of the practice, is that more so than other arts, Taiji, Qigong, meditation, martial arts, even when we get into art specifically, like calligraphy and music, we're always dealing with these kinds of concepts on different levels. So it's a more embodied art, as opposed to maybe a competitive sport, because the competitive sport puts you in this mindset of like, I need to be better than everyone else. Like, I need to push myself. I need to challenge myself. I need to be the one who never quits, and that is definitely a very valuable thing too. But the maybe the lacking of that kind of thought process is that it tends to put you in a place that's detrimental to your own health. That's maybe the key point, is that a lot of those people, they get to a point where they can't do that practice anymore because it actually is hurting their ongoing practice. You injure yourself in a sport, and now you actually can't perform at the levels that you want to with that sport, because you're limited by something that you did through your own training, because it's very intense, it's very extreme, whereas meditation, you could definitely still hurt yourself if you maybe put your knees in a really awkward position and stayed there for a whole day. But generally speaking, you're going to challenge yourself, but you're not going to put yourself in these extreme situations. And so you have a much slower burn at your, improvement, and it's much more sustainable. It's much more healthy. It's much more aimed at longevity. So I think that's maybe the key point with these practices, that they're the embodiment of the thoughts, of the emotions, of the philosophy that we want to aspire to. And that's the premise of them. That's the premise of Qigong. That's the premise of meditation, is you're trying to internalize these concepts that you're learning through this practice.
From probably from a universal standpoint, when you touched upon earlier in our discussion, you touched upon the mindset of this, whatever we're doing is a journey, not some sort of static points. How important do you think that is in a human being's life for making positive changes that enrich their lives?
I mean, I think that is the most important thing. I mean, we are traveling through time, or time is traveling through us, how you want to look at it. And we have experiences and goals and achievements, and we have a journey that we're all participating in. And I am a firm believer that, it's definitely journey before destination. You have kind of a direction or an aspiration or a goal that you're looking for. And there may be like these kind of achievements along the way. There's these goalposts or these kind of signposts that tell you you're going the right way. But the real destination, I don't know if it's a place that we ever actually get to. I think it is that journey. It is like how you walk that way, how you carry yourself, how well you get there in a way. And I like to think of this a lot with the analogy of, like, if we think about walking our journey, then we can say, like, what are we doing these practices for? And that's like, well, that's to train yourself to be more stable, to be more confident, to be more upright, to be more observant. And then you'll find that, okay, when you're walking the trail through the mountains, you tend to look at the ground the whole time, and you just focus on the moment, because you're trying to make sure you don't trip. You're checking for snakes. You're watching your step on the cliffside. You're kind of always wrapped up in this singular moment. But if you train yourself to walk properly, to hike, to be able to be aware of your footsteps and your balance and your direction, you'll find that when you get to those parts of the path that you're comfortable at because you've walked them many times, or you've overcome things that are much more difficult, then you start to raise your gaze, and you can look up at the horizon and you can see around you. And you find that you don't actually have to look at your steps the whole time and just focus on that moment. You can kind of enjoy the environment, or better yet, you can stop walking. You can take a break. And those are those meditative moments where you actually, like, you stop moving. You don't get lost in this ongoing path that never ends. You just take a break and you observe around you. You observe how you feel. And so that becomes like a moment of reflection or introspection or hopefully improvement, where you deal with things. And then you pick up your stuff and you continue along your path. But you find that each time you do that, you get a little bit more comfortable. You get a little bit more relaxed. And then you can look up and you can enjoy the journey itself without just focusing on these tiny details. If you always look at the ground, you're going to trip over something, And the classic Chinese phrase is, no one trips over mountains. You trip over anthills, you trip over sticks, you trip over small things. So it's like, we want to deal with these small things. We want to clean the path. We want to have a smooth journey. So it's always about this journey before destination. Because that's the part that we live. That's the part that we experience. And so I think that's definitely my focus. And one of the things I like about maybe to add a little bit of Daoist cultural conceptuality to this, the idea of Tao, of Taoism, the whole premise of even just the character of Tao, it's representative of a person, and then the character that underlines the Tao and kind of has the radical on the side is the symbol for someone walking. So if we wanted to translate Tao which I don't think we normally do. It's kind of a placeholder of itself for this concept. But if we really wanted to express it, I think that because we look at it, we see ourself, and we see walking this way, walking this path, or this road. I think that the Tao is the path that comes about as we walk it. So it's that lived experience of the journey in the moment that is the Tao. And it's really cool because the character itself is the pictographic representation of the self walking. So it's this idea of it's an action, it's an ongoing process. And I think that that's definitely my understanding, my take is, the way comes about as we walk.
Yeah, I think that's quite beautiful. I was just briefly in China for 2 weeks, 3 cities, and one of the many things that I found kind of enchanting was the people I engaged with took storytelling to different heights than I had ever experienced. So, what role does storytelling have in your approach, your teachings?
Very big. I think that a lot of the biggest examples, like you've picked up now, just by me talking, I tend to go into metaphor and analogy, and this is very typical for Chinese philosophy, and I really enjoy that. And I think that that's a form of art. It's like audio art, Like we have visual art that can tell us a story and give us a meaning, but you can't really explain it in words. It's very subjective. And I think that storytelling is like I see people as being the animals of storytelling. Like that's what makes us different, is we have this ability to create these webs and stories and these examples that, even though I'm not really saying like a straight answer, like this is how you do it and 1, 2, 3 and now you have it. We're not logical, we're emotional, we're storytellers, we're passing on this kind of conversation that keeps being added to, and I really like that idea. So I think storytelling is really important, and I think it's like the thing that we're always sharing with people is like our hopes. That's our story. That's like the highlight reel of our life in a way, where it's like, these are the things I want to aspire to be, and these are the things I want to pass on, and I want you to be inspired by, in this kind of ongoing thread. Storytelling is very, very important. I mean, I can only share with you my experience, and I hope that experience maybe aligns with yours in some way, or gives you perspective on your own experience. But that's all we're really doing. Like, we can never have the exact same perspective as each other. You can't even have the exact same perspective as you did a day ago. You're always changing. You're always reacting and responding to different things. And so the story is like the thing that we tell ourselves. It's like the identity of self is this story that we've created, but there's a problem with language in that I can only give you the subjective experience, but what you're listening to is hopefully that underlining root that's kind of more at the core of it. It's like, I can't really tell you what color is blue, but we can share the words and tell stories about it, but then we understand that, okay, we have an experience that's similar, but we have to understand that we're also like, two different beings. Like, we might not be experiencing the same color, we might not be experiencing the same story, but we can still kind of have this shared experience of that phenomena. So storytelling, very important to me. I grew up watching movies, grew up reading fantasy and science fiction. I still do all of those things. I look at them with a different light, I think, now, but I think the art of storytelling is a very important concept to me, because I love world building. I love this, I love those kinds of projects and those kinds of creations, especially novels and movies and things like this. For me, that's like the way you tell a story is much more, maybe even more important than the story itself. When we read the story, we kind of know how it's going to end. You watch the movie and it's like, well, bad guy steals this, and you're like, well, you know what's going to happen in the movie. You know, the good guy's going to get it back. But that's not what you go watch the movie for. You know, you don't go watch for the result. You go and watch because of the story that's told around it. Like, how do you get from point A to point B? You know, that's a story. That's a journey. That's what I want to see. That's what I want to experience and share. Yeah.
Nice. I like that. As someone who walks the path of embodied Taoist practice, if you had one message for those on any type of transformative path, what would it be? And also include, if you don't mind, in your answer, for those considering taking some first steps on a transformative path.
My first piece of advice for that is, you know, if you have something that you are considering, if you have something that you are daydreaming about, if you are something that comes up in your mind, you know, repeatedly, then that is your body, your mind, your emotions telling you, you know, giving you a sign that, you know, maybe you should try. You should take those steps. You know, one of the reasons why I came here was I'm a very how would I say this? A very avid daydreamer. You know, I used to play ad libs with what if questions, and you know, before smartphones, before the internet had every, you know, waking moment of your life, I would sit there and just think like, what if this happened, and then what? And then I would create these big fantasies and stories in my head as I'm like walking to school or something. And I did that for so long, it actually became very stagnating. It became very, you know, almost like restricting, because I was always just thinking about what if something happened, but I never actually did the if, you know. And I got kind of lost in my own daydream in a way. And at a certain point, I started thinking about, like, what if now? Like, what if I actually did that today? What would that look like in 5 years? What would that look like in 10 years? And that's really the one word change that brought me to China the first time. Because I was, like, thinking about it so long that I was like, what if I actually just did it? Like, there's nothing actually holding me back, you know? So my first piece of advice is, if you have something that you're considering, or something you want to learn or do or try, my advice is to definitely take those steps to go do it. Because having a challenge that you potentially would fail at is better than having the regret of never knowing. So, you know, always take those opportunities. The other thing I would say is, when you're doing those things, don't get lost in how much time it's going to take. Don't get lost in how difficult it's going to be. You know, my idea is that you never look at something taking time. You always look about how much time are you going to give to it. You know, because that's a vocabulary change we need to make. We need to be able to say, you know, this is the thing I want. It's not going to take me 5 years. I'm going to contribute 5 years to that. You know, I'm going to put in the time, because that puts you in this positive role. You know, you don't want to see things as always taking from you. You know, like you have a credit that you're using up. You know, and I think sometimes we look at that and we think, okay, if I do this, then it'll take this long, and then I can't do that, and there's this kind of snowball effect of our imagination. When the reality is, there's really nothing holding people back. You know, so don't let yourself, you know, restrict yourself. You know, there's a lot of opportunity in the world today. There's a lot of great things that are always developing, and you know, like this conversation wouldn't be possible a decade ago. Like, it's a phenomenal world, and there's so many tools that we can use. It's a shame if we don't give ourselves the good faith to take those opportunities for ourselves, to give ourselves those chances. So go for it. You know, nothing to lose.
Amen. Jake, I want to thank you for sharing a bit of your journey, and certainly your wisdom with such clarity and grace. And so many things I feel have been left on the table that you've brought up that I was so tempted to ask so many questions. So with that, I do hope you'll consider returning.
Yeah, yeah, I really enjoyed it. Really observant, detailed questions. Like it's very, very nice conversation.
Well, thank you. And to everybody, I believe what Jake's offered today isn't just insight into Wudang or Taoism. It's a reminder that transformation begins with presence. He spoke of intention and certainly the courage to return to perhaps simplicity. And for everybody, till next time, take care and thank you.
Very well put. Thank you for having me.